The storm came without warning, the way storms always do in the Blue Ridge Mountains. One moment the sky was a pale sheet of grey, and the next it split apart with a violence that shook the trees down to their roots. Ilara Voss had been hiking the northern trail for 6 hours, and she was lost. Her phone had died 2 hours ago. The map she'd printed from the ranger station was now a wet, pulpy mess in her back pocket. She was 24 years old, a graduate student in forestry, and she had made the kind of mistake that killed people every year in these mountains. She had told no one where she was going. She had packed for a day hike, not a survival situation. And she had ignored the clouds building on the western ridge because she was stubborn, because she had always been stubborn, because her father used to say that stubbornness would either save her life or end it. The rain came sideways through the pines, cold as needles. Her jacket was soaked through within minutes, and she could feel her core temperature dropping. She knew what hypothermia felt like because she had studied it in textbooks, but textbooks never mentioned the way your thoughts begin to feel like they belong to someone else, how your legs keep moving even when your brain has stopped giving the orders. She almost walked past the cabin. It was set back from what might have once been a trail, half swallowed by rhododendron and kudzu. The logs were dark with age and rain, and the roof sagged in the middle like a tired spine. There were no lights in the windows because there were no windows, just squares cut into the walls and covered with something that might have been oiled canvas or animal hide. It looked abandoned. It looked like it had been abandoned for 100 years. Ilara did not hesitate. She pushed through the undergrowth, climbed the 2 rotting steps to the porch, and shoved open the door. It swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human, and she stumbled inside, dripping and shaking, into the darkness. The smell hit her first. Wood smoke and animal fat and something deeper, something organic and wild, like the inside of a cave where things lived and died in equal measure. She stood in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust, and slowly the room assembled itself around her. A stone fireplace against the far wall, cold but recently used, the ashes still pale. A rough wooden table with a single chair. Shelves lined with jars and bundles of dried herbs. Animal pelts stacked in a corner. A narrow cot pushed against the wall, covered with furs. And in the far corner, sitting perfectly still in a chair she hadn't noticed, a man. Ilara's heart didn't just skip. It stopped. For one full second, she was dead, and then her body remembered what fear was for and flooded her with enough adrenaline to run a marathon. But she didn't run. Her legs had locked, and the man was between her and the door now, because she had stepped too far inside, because she hadn't looked, because the storm had made her desperate and desperation makes you blind. He was enormous. That was the first thing she processed. Not fat but built like something carved from the mountain itself, broad across the shoulders and thick through the chest. His hair was long and dark, streaked with grey, and it hung past his shoulders in tangled ropes. His beard covered most of his face, but she could see his eyes. They caught what little light leaked through the doorway and reflected it back like an animal's. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her with those pale, steady eyes, and Ilara understood with absolute clarity that she had walked into the cabin of Silas Crane. Everyone in the valley knew about Silas Crane. The rangers spoke about him in low voices, the way people speak about weather they can't control. He had lived on the mountain for over 20 years, alone, in the deep woods where the trails ended and the maps went blank. Hikers who wandered too close to his territory came back with stories. He had fired a rifle over their heads. He had appeared from nowhere on the trail ahead of them, silent as smoke, and stared until they turned around. One hunter claimed Silas had killed his dogs for chasing a deer onto his land. Another said he had found a row of animal skulls mounted on stakes along a ridgeline, a border marker written in bone. The sheriff left him alone. The Forest Service left him alone. Everyone left Silas Crane alone, because the mountain was his, and the things that happened on it were his business, and nobody wanted to find out what he would do if they pushed. And now Ilara was standing in his cabin, dripping rainwater onto his floor. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out thin and broken. "I didn't know anyone was here. I'm lost, and the storm." "I know what the storm is," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel turning over in a creek bed. He still hadn't moved. His hands rested on his knees, and she noticed they were scarred across the knuckles, thick with calluses that looked almost like bark. "I'll leave," she said. "I'll go right now." "You'll die," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to say the sun rises in the east. "Temperature's dropping. You're wet. You've got no gear, no light, and you don't know where you are." Ilara swallowed. He was right about all of it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain hammered the roof, and somewhere in the woods a tree cracked and fell with a sound like a cannon shot. Then Silas Crane stood up, and Ilara flinched so hard she hit the wall behind her. He didn't look at her. He walked to the fireplace, knelt, and began building a fire with the slow, deliberate motions of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Kindling first, then splits of dry oak, then a single match struck against the hearthstone. The flame caught and grew, and the room filled with warm light, and Ilara saw that the cabin was cleaner than she had expected. The jars on the shelves were neatly arranged. The pelts were carefully tanned. There were books stacked beside the cot, their spines cracked and worn. "Sit by the fire," he said without turning around. "Take off that jacket. It's doing you more harm than good." She didn't move. He glanced over his shoulder. "I'm not going to hurt you, girl. If I wanted you gone, you'd be gone. Sit down before you fall down." Something in his voice, not kindness exactly but a kind of gruff practicality, made her believe him. She peeled off her jacket and sat on the stone hearth, and the heat from the fire was so intense and so welcome that she nearly cried. Silas moved around the cabin with a quiet efficiency that reminded her of her grandfather. He set a kettle on an iron hook over the fire. He pulled a wool blanket from a chest and dropped it beside her without ceremony. He opened a jar and spooned something into a tin cup, and when the water boiled, he poured it and handed it to her. It was tea, dark and bitter, flavored with something she couldn't identify. It tasted like the forest smelled. "Thank you," she whispered. He sat back down in his chair and watched the fire. They didn't speak for a long time. The storm raged outside, and inside the cabin the fire crackled and popped, and the tea warmed Ilara from the inside out. She studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. Up close and in the firelight, he was younger than she had imagined. 50, maybe. His face was deeply lined, weathered by sun and cold, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He didn't look crazy. He didn't look dangerous. He looked tired. "Why do you live up here?" she asked, and immediately wished she hadn't. But he answered, "Because down there doesn't make sense to me." She waited for more, but that was all he offered. In the morning the storm had passed, and the mountain was washed clean and glittering. Silas walked her to the trailhead without being asked. He moved through the forest like he was part of it, stepping over roots and ducking branches without looking, navigating by landmarks invisible to her. They walked for 2 hours, and he spoke exactly once. "Tell the rangers you sheltered in a rock overhang," he said. "Don't tell them about the cabin." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because if people know where I am, they'll come. And I came up here so they wouldn't." She nodded. At the trailhead, she turned to thank him, but he was already gone, dissolved back into the trees like wood smoke into sky. She stood there for a moment, listening to the birds and the dripping water and the vast, indifferent silence of the mountain. She never told anyone where the cabin was. But every winter, when the first hard frost came to the valley, she hiked to a spot on the northern trail and left a bag of coffee and a bundle of books beside a particular oak tree. And every time she came back, the bag was gone.